Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining VBCC's monthly webinar. Today, we are honored to have Wayne Austin, who is a sales engineer with the Fixed Assets team, presenting to us. And before I hand it over to Wayne, I just want to let you know you are all in listen-only mode. We are recording this, and we'll post it on our website after. And also, if you have any questions, there is a questions tab there. Just type in your questions and we will address most of them, if not all of them, at the end of the session. Thank you so much. And Wayne, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Kelly. Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us. I'm Wayne Austin. I'm a sales engineer with the Fixed Asset team at Sage Software, and we work very closely with Kelly. So on today's call, what I'm going to be covering, I will go over our fixed asset solution completely, which is a resource that you can use for managing your fixed assets through their complete life cycle. So which includes from before they become a fixed assets all the way through disposals. And I know we're only in May, but I definitely want to talk about year end because, of course, to have a really great year end, you'll want to do some planning, take care of all of the things that you would need to as you go throughout the year, and be able to wrap things up nicely on the back end. As part of that, I will cover the physical inventory process as well as some of the resources that we have available at Sage City in pretty good detail. I will also leave some time to go into the software so you can actually see how intuitive and user-friendly it is and see some of the things I will show you during this presentation where you can actually see that in action. So first, let's look at the Sage Fixed Asset solution overall. So this solution is really designed for handling your assets through a full life cycle. And this really is made up of 4 pieces. Our planning module. This is what would be used for handling CIP, so before item becomes a fixed asset. So if you've got ongoing or recurring projects and you need to be able to manage the budget for these, that's the module that would actually handle that. We'll talk about a depreciation module, which is the heart of the solution, where you will handle all of your depreciation for tax or for GAAP. The tracking module as well for doing physical inventory, and the custom reporting feature. So let's go a little deeper into the planning module first. So in the planning module, you will be able to manage multiple projects at once. You can set an original as well as a revised budget for these projects and be able to track your spend against both sets of numbers. So the picture you're seeing on the right is actually a snapshot which you can have open when you're opening any of your projects, where you can see some basic information about what's going on with that project. For example, what's spent or unspent of the budget, which is displayed in the top left portion there. You can see what's capitalized and expense, even get a complete transaction count. And if you look below the graphic in the center, you'll see it'll show the actual spending against an original as well as a revised budget. So part of how this solution works, it fully integrates with the depreciation module. So while you're creating line items or assets in the planning module, these will be coming from invoices, POs, accounts payable, whatever the case may be. The total of that full spend is what's going to become your acquisition value for that particular asset. All of these assets can then be sent individually or together over to any company in your depreciation database to start depreciation. So it eliminates the need for any type of double entry. So it's a great way of managing any project and being able to do some reporting on what your spend is against budget for any of those projects. The depreciation module. Now, this is really the heart of the system where all of your depreciation calculations for tax, your internal book, tax, AMT, ACE, are going to be calculated. Now, of course, you can utilize any of the books that you need to based on what your needs are. So if you're a standard U.S. company, of course, you may be doing both tax and GAAP, or you may choose to do one or the other. Even customers who are outsourcing their tax preparation, for example, to an outside CPA firm, are usually very pleased with the type of tax reporting you can get out of this. So they generally will still use this and capture that tax data, thereby reducing some of the billable hours on the back end, and send that data off to a CPA firm. On the other side of that, we also have many CPA firms that use our solution for managing fixed asset depreciation for a large number or small number of client base, because you can create as many companies as you need in the system. There's no additional cost for that. You can simply create as many companies as you want and manage those separately for your clients if you are a CPA firm. The snapshot that you're seeing here, by the way, similar to what I showed you in the planning module, really captures what's going on overall with your depreciation of your assets. Now, you can view this information by any of the books, and there are some additional tabs of information that you can look at as well. In this particular view, you're looking at what's placed in service by quarter, and in the upper right, it's showing the total net book value of all of the assets, and even breaks that down by what's active, disposed, transfers, or an accident, and so on. There are some really good tools built into the solution as well. This screenshot is of the Audit Advisor. So as you go through the year, and you don't have to wait, of course, until year end to find out if you're doing something incorrectly or have some type of an issue going on, that's a potential red flag for an audit. So how this actually works, you can run the Audit Advisor at any point, once a month or maybe once a quarter or even semi-annually. And if there's anything going on as a potential red flag for an audit, it will actually highlight that, as you see in red. It's going to show you what the potential issue is that it sees, and it's going to also recommend a resolution, and it'll actually create a group where it's going to identify any assets that is triggering that particular scenario. So in this particular case, the asset that is being flagged, or assets, there may be multiple, are actually using less than 100% business use, and so they're not entitled to a full year's bonus depreciation. So it actually flags it, gives it to you in clear English so that you can take the appropriate steps to correct whatever that issue may be. There are, of course, many standard reports built into the solution. You can also set various security profiles. So if, for example, you don't want everyone to have full access to be able to run depreciation, or to set or clear period closes, or transfer or dispose assets, you can actually create separate profiles and assign users based on that if you are in a multi-user environment. Some of the reports built in that I mentioned, for example, the 4562 is one of those. And you can, of course, also run the tax expense report, would be used for reconciling that 4562. There's also a 4797 worksheet for your sale of property. So there are many standard tax reports as well as GAAP reports built into the solution. So let's talk about the tracking module. The tracking module integrates and uses the same database as the depreciation module. And this is a tool that would use for doing a physical inventory of your fixed assets. Now, as part of doing that physical inventory, you will be able to use a traditional scanner, such as one pictured here, or you can also use an Android app. Now, currently, these are the options we have available. Down the pipe, we will, of course, be adding Apple iOS, and that's still in development. But what that gives you the ability to do is define an inventory list of assets you currently have in your registry. You can push that out to multiple devices where you can have multiple people doing a physical inventory of your fixed assets. So, of course, one of the things here you want to be able to identify is ghost assets. So if you've got assets on the registry, you're not getting the use of them because they're missing, lost, or stolen. And you are, of course, paying property taxes, insurance premium for these assets. So if you look at it this way, that's actually a three-way cost to you. So what this particular tool does is gives you a means of identifying any ghost assets you may have out there so that you can remove them from the registry by doing a proper disposal and capturing that gain loss information. As part of that inventory process, you will actually end up with a reconciliation report where you will be able to identify anything that is actually missing from your inventory so that you can take the appropriate action. And the last portion of this is custom reporting. So there are many standard reports that you can actually customize by changing the sort order within the system, but adding the custom reporting feature, which is an option on the standard version of the software, but included automatically in the premier version of the software, gives you the ability to customize much further than just changing sort order. You can actually add or remove different columns of data from the standard reports, and you'll also get a fully integrated version of SAP Crystal Reports. What that gives you the ability to do is create any type of ad hoc reports you want. So if you've got pretty advanced reporting needs, the standard reports don't have all the details you need, you can either export a standard report out to Crystal Reports and further customize it, or you can build an ad hoc report from scratch that you can then pull in fields from any company in the database and create any type of ad hoc report you need. So I mentioned year-end, even though we're just sitting in May here. So there's some really great resources that come along with the solution that's going to be very, very helpful in doing that. And at the top of the list there, you notice I have tax updates. So one of the important things to do, of course, is make sure that when we release our tax update, which usually comes on in January, that you are updating to the latest version of the software, which will include any type of tax rule changes. So, for example, in our January release that just came out this year, all of the rule changes tied to the Bipartisan Budget Act of 2018 are included in this release. And as a result of that particular change, we have actually added 2 new depreciation methods, which would be the remaining value mid-month and remaining value half-year. So if you are one of the verticals impacted that can actually take advantage of those tax rule changes, those extenders, and you need to, for example, extend out ADS life and switch to using a remaining value half year to get that calculation done correctly, that is all built in. If you need to look further back at last year's TCJA tax rule changes, which came out January of 2018, and that is actually retroactive back to September 28th of 17. All of those rules are also built in the system. And you also actually have the ability to make mass changes to your 168 allowance or mass changes to your depreciation method and estimated life across all your assets, all built into the system now. So, being the first thing to do with looking at making sure you can complete your year-end correctly is make sure that you do update when the latest version of the software does come out. The other thing you'll want to certainly do before running depreciation or setting period closes, if you're doing any of those, is you want to complete that physical inventory first to identify those assets that now need to be disposed, that are no longer in service. Once you've done that, then you can actually go through and do some of the other things I've identified here, running depreciation for the month, running your year-end reports. One of the resources available out on our Sage City website is this year-end checklist. So it's a great way of checking things off as you're doing them, going through your year-end process. You can download this in a PDF format by going out to Sage City, which is a collaborative environment that is shared by our users, partners, support folks. So it's a great collaborative environment to get feedback from your peer as to how they are actually doing some of these year-end functions or any other type of issue that they discuss regarding fixed asset management. So absolutely take advantage of those free resources. It's certainly going to make your year-end process go much smoother. Some of the year-end reports that would be identified on that checklist, for example. I talked briefly about the Audit Advisor and how that actually is going to be helpful to you in identifying anything that you may be doing that could be a potential red flag for being audited. There's also a mid-quarter applicability report built in, and this will identify whether or not you need to switch to a mid-quarter convention for any qualified assets. So, for example, if you exceed that 40% of the assets being placed in service in Q4, and you now need to make that switch, the application actually has the ability to make that a global change where you don't have to go into each individual asset or each individual book and make that change. You can do it globally and selectively as well across any of the books you choose and switch to a mid-quarter convention. One of the other reports you also need, of course, is going to be that 4797 sale of property, and I spoke earlier about the 4562. So this form is updated each year, of course, as we do our new tax release. So any changes to the form you would automatically have, and also you would have access to that tax expense report, which will actually also be used for reconciling that 4562 information. So really great tools, really great tax reporting, and of course, for those of you handling GAAP or internal book, you of course would on a periodic basis be posting your journal entry. So that of course you can run monthly, quarterly, whatever frequency you want to do depreciation, and you certainly would be doing that for year end, as well as other report like your depreciation expense report. You would probably also be running your annual activity report, which will capture current year additions, current year disposals, transfers in or out. And of course, there's also a roll forward report that you would use as well. So as I mentioned, those year-end resources are available out on Sage City. Kelly, I'm sure, also has resources available for you to help you plan your year-end activities. So you certainly can also reach out to her as well. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and go into the software so we can take a look at how this solution works and show you some of the new features we've added in this recent update that came out in January. So I'm actually going to start off in the depreciation module so that I can actually talk a bit more about some of the key things that are going to be important to you throughout this process. So if you take a look at this asset snapshot, you can have this feature coming on when you open your company. If you have multiple companies in the system, you can, of course, choose which company you want to open. So you can have multiple companies in the database. And that feature can be turned off or on for displaying this asset snapshot. So as I mentioned, you can view this information by any of the books. And there are some additional details that you can easily see here. So one of the main things, of course, I can see what's placed in service by quarter, but this will be for all assets, not just makers depreciation assets that would be tied to that mid-quarter applicability report. You can also see here total net value of everything, and it breaks it down by what's active, what's disposed, transferred, and so on. I can look at a quick depreciation comparison, looking at acquired value versus accumulated depreciation. And I can also look at a 5-year spend, as well as a breakdown of your investment by remaining life, by percentage. So it's really just a handy tool that you can also run at any point by going up to reports and choosing the asset snapshot if you just want a quick overview of what's going on. The asset list view I'm in here is showing a look at all of my assets in the company, and you can choose what information is displayed here and what order you want to see this information in. Now, if I go into one of my asset details, I wanted to show some information that's captured here in these customizable general information fields, and I'll talk about the book fields down below as well. So a couple of things I do want to show you before going into that is the quick reference that's built in. So if you want to see what the new changes are for the most recent tax rules, you can go to Help, What's New, and click on Learn More. And in this case, in this release, include all of the changes from the Bipartisan Budget Act. So all of that is identified here. And also any feature changes we added, which in this case we added those two new depreciation methods, remaining value mid-month and remaining value half year. Now, if you want to go further back, as I mentioned, and look at the TCJA changes from last year, you can go in and drill down, look at the rules surrounding bonus depreciation, the new tax law identified here, as well as the old tax law, and the tables breaking down how assets are qualified. You can see some information for vehicle limits, section 179. So it's just a nice quick reference that you can jump right into the solution, look at that without having to go hunting around the IRS website for that information. So I mentioned some of the changes that you can easily make in the system, and I want to start with that mid-quarter applicability. So if I want to do a mid-quarter convention switch, I can simply go up to Depreciation, choose the Maker's Convention Switch, and it is as simple as identifying my fiscal year end, which book I actually want to change that for, and I can switch from half-year convention to a mid-quarter convention. So if, for example, I wanted to do this for last year, I could certainly do that and change the mid-quarter convention and apply it to whichever book I choose, and would apply that globally in the company. The other change I mentioned, if you are, for example, doing the 168 allowance, you can make mass changes to that in the solution as well very easily. So if you wanted to retroactively change, for example, you have some assets that are sitting at 50% as opposed to 100 where I am right now. I've already made that change in mine. You can simply go here up to Depreciation, choose the 168 allowance switch, and now you can make a global change to 100% bonus, for example, as I've already done. It will only make the change to assets that actually qualify. I can do this for any group of assets or an individual assets, for any of the books I choose, for any fiscal year end I choose. Because of the rules built in, if I look at an asset that was placed in service prior to where the law is retroactive, you will see that it's still sitting at, let's go to one here, September 21st, would be sitting at 50% bonus, because that is what allowed if it was acquired and placed in service prior to September 28th of 2017. It simply ignores that and leave it sitting at 50%. So it's a great way to make that change if you need, and change your bonus percentage very easily in the system. The two depreciation methods that I mentioned that are now included, your remaining value mid-month and half year. So if, for example, you are making that change and extending out your life on a real property, that would be the method you would switch to, remaining value half year, to get the proper calculation with that tax extender rule change. The other mass change that you can make in the system is you can now also change depreciation method and estimated life across multiple books, or all the books if you choose, across any group of assets. And that would be done using our bulk edit feature. So it is going to have you acknowledge that you've done a backup, as you should with any type of mass changes in the system. And I can choose any group of assets, any group that I created, or I can do this for all my assets, choose which books I actually want to make the changes to. And now I can make mass changes to depreciation methods from anything to something else. Or I can also change estimated life. I can do either or both. Now, I'm going to use an example of estimated life because I do want to show that it does some validation checks here. So if, for example, you're trying to make a change that is not a valid change, and especially when dealing with the tax book rules, I want to show you that it actually will catch that so that you won't make a change that you shouldn't be doing. So let's say I'm going to change all of my 5-year assets, and it is going to look for years and months, and I'm actually going to change that to an invalid estimated life for certain assets that are in my tax book, because I want to actually have it validated and let you see how this actually captures it. I can choose assets only of a certain through date if I choose to. I can go back to my current depreciation through date, or I can go back to the placed in service date. And if I do have any assets that may have a beginning date specified with a beginning accumulated depreciation as of that particular date, I can choose to also retain that data and not wipe it out as part of my recalculation. So if I go to the next screen, it will now allow me to validate it, and it should generate some errors for assets that are using Makers 200 that I'm now choosing an invalid estimated life. So if you take a look at that, I'm going to make this a bit bigger here. It'll give a warning for something that is not as detrimental, but it's certainly going to be an invalid or gives an error for something that is completely wrong. So in this case here, I'm trying to change estimated lives on fully depreciated assets. So, do I really want to do that? Probably not. But certainly the bigger issue here is for the assets that I have using Makers Formula 200, and I'm now trying to change it to an invalid estimated life of 19 years, it's not going to let me do that. It's saying this is invalid. Anything that is an actual valid change, it's simply going to identify it as valid, no message, and off you go. So it will check all of the assets that would be impacted by this change and flag them so that you can take in a corrective action and then retry the changes that you're planning on doing. So works very, very well. Keeps you out of trouble. Okay. Now, inside the asset details, one of the things I want to point out as well real quick is that you can actually customize any of these fields to capture any information that you choose. So if, for example, you want to be able to use multiple fields for identifying location, you can certainly do that. You want to identify fields for asset classes, certainly your geo accounts. All of these are smart lists that you can create, and you can customize these fields as needed. You can also include notes, attach images of the assets, invoices, and it will take a really nice variety of assets. Let me go to another one here. I'm going to actually attach an image to something that does not have one. So if you go to the asset list here, you will see anything that has the symbol means that there's an image attached, and the ones without means there's no image attached. And even if you do have an image attached, you can actually go in and attach additional images, invoices, and so on. In this case, I have both an invoice as well as an image. And because it will take a variety of file types, if you can take a picture of it or scan it, you can attach it. So PDF, JPEGs, bitmap, and so on. This is a great feature for business continuity. As we've all seen with the crazy weather that's been going on around the country, one of your sites, for example, has a group of assets that have been damaged or destroyed, and now you have to reach out to your insurance company. If you've got images, invoices, all the documentation to that asset, now it's pretty easy for you to prove what you actually had and the condition it was in. So all of this really helps as far as those assets go. And as I mentioned with the physical inventory portion, when using an Android app, for example, and doing a physical inventory of your asset, if you don't have images of your assets during that process, you can actually take a picture and attach it, which will actually end up here as well as an image of that asset. So if you don't currently have a means of doing that, that's a great way to actually go ahead and do it as part of a physical inventory. Okay. Now, as going back to some of our discussions about year-end, you can run depreciation for whatever period you choose. And currently, I'm depreciated through my last fiscal year end. I can go backwards and forwards in time if I choose to for any of the books. If I want to do some reporting in the past, I can absolutely do all of the above. So once you've completed your physical inventory, and let's say you are now sitting at your year end, let me actually take a moment and show you some of the tools that I talked about as far as year end processing. The Audit Advisor, you can run this at any time for any of the books you choose. for any fiscal year end that you choose. So if you want to look at current year or last fiscal, you can certainly do that. So I'm going to go ahead and look at last year since that's where I'm currently depreciated out to. And I'm going to go ahead and run that Audit Advisor. And it's a nice, easy process. And it's going to look at all of my assets, and wherever it sees an issue, this is where it's going to generate that exception in red, show you what it sees as a potential issue, and recommend a resolution. It is also going to create a group where any assets triggering that are going to actually show up. So all I would need to do at this point is I can close this and go to that group that was created. Okay, so for 2018, and these are items that both were triggering that particular issue. So here I have an asset that was less than 100% business use, and I'm actually trying to take a full year depreciation on that asset. So you can simply go back to any of the areas that something was flagged, go to that group that was created, and look at the assets that were generating that error and make the correction as you see fit. So it really works out very, very well. So now I'm actually going to go into the reporting section and look at some of those reports I talked about that are going to be crucial for year end. The actual 4562, which you can generate, it will also generate the worksheet that goes along with this. I'm going to run this for last year. And this will generate, as I stated, the actual Form 4562. And you'll actually have both pages. If you do have amortized assets, all of that's captured here as well. And it's also going to generate that worksheet that goes along with that form. Okay. And to reconcile that 4562, as I stated earlier, is that tax expense report, which is going to capture your current year's 168 expense. All of the reports in here, by the way, are exportable in a variety of formats, and I'll show you that in a moment. But if you take a look at that tax expense report, and you can run this in full details or subtotals only, and it will have all of your totals on the last page, less any disposals or transfers. To export any of these reports, you can simply choose the export button. You can export them out to Crystal reports, PDF, standard Excel, CSV files, so lots of options. So it gives you a tremendous amount of flexibility in the system. The other report for year-end you'll likely need would be this sale of property report, the 4797 worksheet. I'm going to actually run mine a little further back in time here to make sure I capture some sale of property to populate some of these fields. And if you take a look at that, and this, you'll also have both pages. Your ordinary gain-loss information is going to be on the second page here. And again, these are all exportable reports. Now, for customization, I had mentioned earlier, I wanted to show you that for a moment. You can run these reports, system number 1 to the M in the standard format, unsorted, but this is where you can actually go in and say, hey, I want to actually sort this report by location, and you can do this up to 3 layers deep, for example, and I can sort and subtotal this by asset class below that, for example. So I can multi-layer that sort and run the report, and instead of it coming out just system number 1 to the end, I can now create different segments. This might be something you'll want to do for a variety of reasons, just to change how the report is compiling the information, where you can sort and subtotal by location or by state if you're multi-state, and so on. All of the reports here are exportable in multiple formats. So for example, like that depreciation expense, I can actually push it out to a standard Excel. But if you notice, there are some merge column data when doing it in standard. So depending on what your needs are, you may want to actually push a report like that out in data-only format, where you don't have any merge column data and you can take any other action you need to. Of course, you can push things out in a CSV file as well. So here is that depreciation expense report, where I've now sorted it by location, and below that by asset class. So it changes the way this is laid out. That's one of the things you can actually do. And of course, any of these customizations you do, you can save it as a custom report and name it accordingly. So if you take a look at these versions, my standard report is in gray, all of these in yellow. I actually changed to something. So if I need to be able to customize beyond that, as I've done with this one, this is where you can go into the customize reporting feature here, and I can add or remove different columns of data, change the orientation. And in this particular one, I have actually added current net book value and said, hey, give me a total at the bottom of this, and I've saved it as a custom report. So you can actually do quite a bit of customizations in the solution all the way through. Okay. Of course, you'll have other standard reports like your annual activity for current year additions, your journal entry, which you, of course, will need to get out to your accounting software. For those of you that are using Sage 100, here's some great news. You don't have to actually run this journal entry manually. This integrates completely with Sage 100, and in Sage 100's case, this report, you don't have to actually run it. As soon as you run depreciation, this information for your journal entry is going to be available in Sage 100. And Kelly's team can help you folks with configuring that integration. Most of the work for this is actually done in the Sage 100 side, and you would simply set the link here as Sage 100 is your favorite. So if I actually try to run the posting link, it'll actually tell me that it's available to Sage 100 and I don't have to run it. Now, the other side of the integration with Sage 100 is for asset creation. If you have the accounts payable module or the purchase order module, you can actually create assets from a purchase order, and from the PO side, it's a one-to-many, so I can create multiple assets from a purchase order here in the depreciation side from inside of Sage 100. From the accounts payable side, it is a one-to-one. I can create a single asset from AP. So all of this can be configured inside of Sage 100. And of course, you have projection reports available here as well. If you want to look at future year depreciation, there's actually an annual projection where you can do a side-by-side with multiple books and see full year depreciation. And there's also a monthly projection, which will show you that information broken down by monthly period expense and year to date. So it gives you quite a bit of ability to look at all of those types of information. The other report you'll probably need for year end that I want to touch on as well is the property tax report. So this is where being able to create groups will come in very handy, because now you can isolate assets based on their jurisdiction. So if you've got assets in a particular location tied to some in a particular state, for example, you can create groups based on that location. You can identify your property tax category in one of the fields and run your property tax report just on the subset of assets you need for that jurisdiction. So that is also another good report that you can filter based on the assets that you need to actually run this for. Works very, very well. Okay. All right, so I actually want to take a moment just to give you a quick glance at the other two pieces of the solution, and then I'll leave some time for questions and answers. So let's go into the tracking module, where I'm just going to briefly show a few things here, and then I'll go into the planning module for handling CIP. So for doing your physical inventory, I'll actually show you a screenshot here of what the tracking app looks like on an Android device. So you can actually push inventory list out to multiple devices. These Android devices or a traditional scanner do not use a license. The only thing that would use a license is the actual tracking software itself, so you can have as many people as you want that you're pushing an inventory list out. We will be able to use that camera, scan the barcode, or in the case of a traditional scanner, it'll use an infrared port on the top there where you can scan, update any of the fields you push out as part of that inventory, and send that data back to the solution. Even take a picture of the asset as well, and be able to send that inventory list back, where you'll then be able to do that reconciliation report that I talked about. So if you take a look at the layout, it looks pretty much the same, but however, if you go into an asset detail, you will see that there are no book fields here. So if you will have a different team in your organization that would be actually conducting these physical inventories, they can't accidentally do anything that would impact your book depreciation or tax depreciation. They simply don't have access to that. They have all of the same 28 general information fields that are in the depreciation side, but there are an additional 12 fields that they can rename to capture an additional information that may not be accounting pertinent. So you have a great way of capturing lots of details about the assets. Now, you are going to be able to define an inventory, push even multiple inventory lists out to multiple devices, and be able to reconcile that data. And I want to show you what that reconciliation report looks like, where you will accept any changes that you may have made as part of that, and any change you accept, it's going to update the information in the asset details, both in the tracking module as well as in the depreciation module. So here is our reconciliation report from the last inventory I did, and I want to show you how it actually captures that. So all of these assets here with the status of N are assets that were not found. As I mentioned, this can be very, very costly to an organization because you don't have use of the assets, you're paying property taxes for these assets, and you're paying insurance premium for them, so it's a three-way cost to you. So identifying missing items is very, very important. Of course, anything with the status not changed will be a status of O, and anything that you did make a change to a status of C. So if as part of that inventory, I updated where the asset's located, if I'm keeping track of who's assigned to any of these fields that I changed that are mutual to both the depreciation and tracking side, will get updated as part of that inventory. And that way, you don't have to do double data entry in both sides. Okay. And I do want to spend a moment before I actually leave some time for Q&A here and talk about the planning module for handling CIP. That's the other piece of this that might be interesting to you if you do have recurring projects. You can have multiple projects going at once, and just like in the depreciation side, you can get a quick snapshot of what's going on with those assets in your CIP status. So I can see what's spent or unspent of my budget. I can have both capitalized or expense item here, and I can do reporting of my actual spend against an original as well as a revised budget. So when you set a project up, for example, you go into my project settings here, you'll populate your project information, your start and end date, assign a project code, and so on, but you certainly will have some approved amount or some budgeted amount you want to do reporting against for that project. So as part of this, while going through your project, let's say you have vendors have cost increases, materials increase, whatever the case may be, you don't have to wipe that number out. You can simply come in and revise that budget. Okay, you can actually even do a quick snapshot here to see where you are against budget as well. But there's more detailed reporting in the system, so you can do some reporting against where your spend is against budget. Each of these actual items here are what's going to become a fixed asset. And if you actually go into the details, you have a series of fields here that are customizable, and these fields can be mapped to fields in the depreciation side. You'll have a tab here where you can capture transactions. So these could be coming from invoices or accounts payable, whatever the case may be. The total of all of these are what's going to roll up to your actual acquisition value, so that when you're ready to send that asset to be placed in service, you can tell that spending is complete, set a completion date, an in-service date, and you can apply any templates that you may have set up in the depreciation side, and you can even split a single asset into multiple. So I want to actually go into an asset here with multiple transactions. and talk about that for a moment. This particular line item, I have both an original and a revised budget, and it is going to track my spend against both at this level. And I have 27 transactions in this particular one. So these will come from things like permits, materials, whatever the case may be. Your sum total of all of these are what's going to become the acquisition value of this asset. This particular one has been sent over, but you can import these invoices or transactions from Excel and populate this in multiple line items or multiple projects at once. Of course, this particular one has been sent. And if you look at the status column here, it will show you status of S like Sam for anything that's been sent, a status of C for anything that's not been sent, and this particular one has a quantity of 4, so I can choose to make it 4 equal value if I choose, or specify individual values. So when this asset gets created in depreciation, that particular one will actually become 4 separate assets. Anything with a status of A, simply just active. To send anything from this module to depreciation, all I need to do is go to Line Items Create, and if you have multiple companies in your depreciation database, you can choose, 1 or 2 assets, whatever the case may be, send them to a particular company, and you may choose to send the others to some other company, or you can select all and have them all created. It will show you how many assets will be created from each of these line items. These are all 1, and this particular one is actually 4. So it makes that process of getting them placed in service very easy. Reporting, which is going to be very important here. You can run some consolidated reports if, for example, you want to look at multiple projects. In my case, I have 2. So this report will now show me the current project I'm in as well as the other one I have selected. And I can look at this in subtotals only against both an original as well as a revised budget. So if you take a look at this report, just a quick way of getting a snapshot of where my spend is for all my projects against budget. You can see here each project listed out, my budget, my actual spend, and whether I'm over or under budget. And I can look at this information in detail, or I can look at this information in subtotals only. I can drill down and look at the individual asset details. And when I run this, I'm currently selecting looking at items over budget. But I certainly can say, hey, I want to look at all line items regardless of their status. And this is going to change the picture a bit here. So now you can see, looking at it from that standpoint, I'm on the budget. If you want to expand the entire thing out, I can do that. Go to Detail View, and it'll expand out all of your projects. And now I can see each line item within each project, which ones are over budget, which ones are under budget, and my project overall is actually under budget. And on to the next project. So it has some great reporting built in that you can leverage and be able to send those assets directly to be placed in service. So I want to actually show you in the depreciation side how one of these items that I send over actually came in and was placed in service, ready to start depreciation, completely avoiding any type of duplicate entry. So when anything is sent from the planning module, it actually will create a group here where I can go to that particular group. It's going to have a timestamp saying the planning module. And anything I send over at that time, be it 1 item or 100 items, will be in that group. This particular item I sent over from the planning module, and it came over with everything needed to start depreciation. Did not have to touch it again. Acquisition date, right, place in service date, property type, the value, of course, all coming from the planning module, and depreciation method and estimated life, because I actually used the template, which I created on this side, all are available in the depreciation side. So this came in ready to start depreciation. Okay, so we've got some time remaining. I want to stop at this point and try to answer any questions you currently have. So I'm going to go ahead and have Kelly ask any question that if it's something I need to show in the application, I can try and show you that quickly. So Kelly, do we have any questions?
Let's see. Our first question is, I'm wondering if it's a cloud application.
This is an on-premise solution, so it is installed on your server. And if you're doing a standalone standard version, it can be just installed on a single workstation. If you're going to be multi-user, it can be installed on your server with the client side on that workstation. Now, it can also be hosted. So if you're currently using a hosting provider or want to work with one of Sage's hosting providers, you can certainly talk to Kelly and she can get some more information for you if you prefer to have this hosted. But it is an on-premise solution that can be hosted, and it actually does support things like Citrix, terminal services for remote access. So that is also an option.
How
Next
about,
question.
are all the modules included, or can I get just the pieces I need?
Oh, that's a great question. So you can get just a single module if you don't have a need for all of it. As we know, not everyone is going to have recurring projects every year, or you may have some of the tool you're doing for doing a physical inventory, for example. You can simply get depreciation only, or you can get depreciation tracking, depreciation and planning. You can actually do a single module by itself.
Final question is, where can I see more about year-end procedures?
Okay, definitely you can go out to the Sage City, and I'll put that link back up. It's really a collaborative environment, and you can certainly reach out to Kelly. They probably have some resources for you as well, but many of our customers or partners go out on Sage 50. There's a lot of knowledge-based articles. There's actually a year-end center that you can go to, and it'll have things like the year-end checklist, resources, how-to guides, even if you need to do some training, access to links to Sage University for training and so on. So many, many options are there. But definitely, I would start with Kelly's folks, see what resources they have available for you, and you can certainly expand on that by going out to the Sage City website and access information you can pull down yourself.
And that's all the questions we have right now.
Okay, great.
Remember, if anybody does have questions, feel free to reach out to the VBCC team. Anybody here can direct you where you need to go. I'm sure you've all worked with one of us at some point. And thank you, Wayne. We really appreciate you taking all the time today to discuss this with us. Very great presentation.
Appreciate your time, everyone, and you're very welcome, Kelly. Look forward to the next webinar. Appreciate you taking this time to join us.
All right. Thank you all for your time today, and have a great rest of your day.